Thank you for having me. And I can guarantee you I am not anything resembling the Hulk. Although I have had complete strangers come up to me in airports in the United States and ask me if I was that actor. So it's crazy. I don't know. I don't do actors, and I've looked them up and I'm like, I don't see the resemblance at all, but I guess people do. Thank you for allowing me to come here today. Some of you have known me for many years, and others maybe not so much, and that's okay. I come here today because I have had a relationship with the Gravelberg Church over many years as I've been able to serve in the kingdom, in the Lord's kingdom, being sent to different parts of the world as a missionary. And as I continue to follow where He leads me. And so I'll share a little bit about that this morning, where the Lord has me serving now, and also some reminders for all of us of how He would like all of us in His kingdom as His servants to be serving the world in which we live. And I think that the worship this morning was very meaningful to remind us of who we are as God's children, but also for those of us that choose to reciprocate God's love, the ways that He puts us to work, to do good works, as we read in one of the verses, and how that's part of our spiritual sacrifice. So we don't do animal sacrifices anymore. We are living. We're called to be living sacrifices in service to the Lord and love to others, sharing His love, being an aroma of love to the world and to a world where many people don't feel that love. And so I guess the challenge for all of us is to live out what we sang. We sing about surrendering all to the Lord, and that's the deepest form of service in love and response to the Lord for all that He's done for us, right? And I guess in some ways, when the Lord captured me in last week in high school, or during that last time in high school, coming to realize, growing up, gonna leave the nest, not knowing really who I was, not always living in anything that reflected God, realizing that I didn't want to go out into adulthood without having the Lord as a part of my life. And I think sometimes if we just take one little small step of faith towards God, He will not only meet us, but He'll come and meet us and embrace us, and He will help us to make that commitment to eventually surrender all to Him. And so He does that in a loving way. It's a process, it's a journey, and I feel like He's been graceful in allowing me to walk with Him in that journey in my life. So after I finished university, and even while I was in university, I had some of you would know some of my mentors that would come to our campus. Like Bernard Croxgard would come to our campus, and he would share with us on Friday afternoons when everybody else was going to the Owl, which is the bar on campus. We would be in the chapel. Oops, sorry about that. We'd be in the chapel reading the Bible while everybody else was doing their thing. And little steps like that, again, of faith that the Lord used. And so in the summer times, we would go on these short-term mission trips to Mexico, and I was given just my mind was expanded into how big the world is and how many people there are, and how much the needs are in the world. And so after that, when I graduated, he asked me, well, what are you going to do now? And he had told me how he had been a part of a missions program that took him to different parts of the world, and asked me if I'd be interested in something like that. And I thought, well, I've really enjoyed going to Mexico and teaching English and meeting people and sharing my faith with people. And he's like, yeah, you could do that, and you can do that for 2 years. And so I ended up going to a missions program in Texas, meeting 60 other young adults, and then we were scattered across the world, and myself and 3 others were sent to Ecuador. And so I spent 2 years in Ecuador, was able to learn English. And hopefully I knew some English by then. Learn Spanish and have this cultural experience. Come back to Canada and was able to, I was asked to help be a part of that former mentor of mine who is now working at a college called Western Christian College, doing a missions training program, the team program, training in evangelism and missions. And I was asked to be his helper, do kind of ministry with the young people there at Western in Dauphin, Manitoba. And also meeting my wife there, who was one of the students who I wasn't supposed to be dating, and stuff like that. And the Lord led us to be together. And so next month we celebrate 25 years of marriage, which is pretty cool. And yeah, who would have thought that? Yeah. So from there, we decided that we wanted to get further training, because I knew that the Lord was calling me to do mission work. And so we went to Abilene, Texas, and got further training. And my wife was able to become a teacher, which she now is able to do in Brandon. And it's pretty helpful for a missionary couple to have a wife who can help with, maybe some savings and whatnot. So it's pretty amazing how God has planned our life. When you surrender to Him, He will lead if you're willing to follow. And so from there, we went and joined 4 other couples that were moving to Brazil. And so many of you can remember me probably doing presentations here when we lived and worked to help plant a church in the 3rd biggest city in Salvador, and Salvador, Bahia, Brazil. And so we learned Portuguese when we were there. And then when we came back to Canada, we came back, but we knew that the Lord was calling us back to the mission field, and we ended up going back to Ecuador, where I had already served. And so we were able to go and continue to build the churches that I had helped begin 15 years before that. And so then we spent years there, and during those years we had our 3 children, and now they've grown, and our oldest daughter is studying in the university in Brandon, and my oldest son graduates in a month, and our youngest is in grade 6. And so when we came back to Canada in 2017, 2018, it was right in there that we came back and we're transitioning to Canada. Our overseeing church, which had been for many years the Saskatoon Church of Christ, they had a plan for us to come back to Canada and have a year to figure out what it was that the Lord was calling us to do. Because I came back to Canada not having really I was like open to whatever it was that God wanted me to do. I kind of thought I would teach English maybe at the U of R or something, had no idea. And I had another mentor of mine who you guys are getting to know, John McMillan, phoned me up. This would have been spring of 2018, and he says to me, Travis, what is it that you want to do here in Canada? And, with his voice, right? You guys are getting to know him. And I was like, I actually have no idea. And he's like, well, do you want to work at the camp, or do you want, and then he's like, do you want to work with Latinos in Canada? And I'm like, well, that sounds pretty good, because we had worked with Latinos for 20 years. And, we know Spanish and Portuguese. I was like, that sounds great. I mean, we would love to do something like that. And he's like, well, then you need to come down to my farm next weekend, and I'm going to drive you over to Brandon, Manitoba, and I'm going to introduce you to some Spanish churches in Brandon, Manitoba. And I'm like, there's Spanish speakers in Brandon, Manitoba? Like, are you kidding me? And he's like, yeah, there's like thousands of them. I'm like, what? So the next Sunday in a blizzard, we got up, drove to to his farm, and then the next morning we drove to Brandon, Manitoba, got introduced to what God had done in the 20 years that we weren't living in Canada, bringing the world to Canada, and including Brandon, Manitoba, including 5,000 Latinos. And so the last 7 years, we worked with the Spanish-speaking churches in Brandon, trying to help them to integrate into life in Canada and also continue to grow in their faith and service to the Lord. During that time, and especially, we all know that COVID wasn't easy. The Lord was opening doors for me because I'm part of the Brandon Ministerial Association. So I was getting to know lots of the other pastors and all the other churches in Brandon, and the Lord is making it clear to me that He had, I could say, other works in His kingdom that I could feel that He was calling me to. But I didn't know what that was. But it was about it was a year and 2 months ago, so just about maybe a month before that, where there was a series of events that happened, and the way that He had been guiding me into the downtown of Brandon, and seeing the brokenness, and I would say the spiritual darkness and cloud that's sort of over the downtown of Brandon, and the Lord just impressing upon me that this is where He wants me to serve, that all of the homeless people that you would see if you came to Brandon, you would see they're walking around the downtown all day long. And I, of course, because of my experiences and the work that He's done in my life, I was feeling the call to do something to help these folks. And it was around that time where the now director of Youth for Christ in Brandon got to know me through the Brandon Ministerial meetings, and she asked me first to be on the board. So I was on the board of the Youth for Christ ministry there in Brandon first for about a few months, and going to the meetings and seeing all the ministry that they were doing to the people who I could see that were, I guess you'd say, the most needy. And maybe, I don't know, only God knows, because only God knows hearts, but maybe the people that are more open to searching for Him or allowing Him to come and work in their hearts and in their lives. And so finally, one morning, she calls me back into her office, and she's like, Travis, we're really needing some more workers to do the work in our ministry. And you're still young, you're still able to do this work, and I really would like for you to consider coming and working in our ministry. And so that's when we started thinking and praying about that and asking the Lord, is this what you want? And having a lot of my questions that were in my head, like doing ministry with churches for 30 years and moving into a ministry where you don't lead from the pulpit every Sunday and things like that, that being a concern for me. Other concerns was um, my age and knowing that I'm going to work with young adults who are 18 to 30 years old, and many of them come from very difficult, broken homes, difficult backgrounds, and thinking that how would they ever relate to a guy like me? And having her, the director, say to me, just come and try and take, she would take me up to the apartments that we have um, for homeless young adults in Brandon, and allowing me to just introducing me to them and interact with them, and seeing that they didn't think I was too old or, too not cool or anything like that, right? And seeing that the Lord was definitely opening a door for me to work there. And so for the last year and 2 months, I've been now working with the Youth for Christ ministry in downtown Brandon. And along with that, we have also moved into working with an inner city church, which is more like an outreach. So we do have Sunday worship and things like that, but most of the people that come to our our building, our drop-in center, I guess you would call it, would be the homeless people that come from the homeless shelter, and especially on Sundays where the city doesn't really offer, the soup kitchen is not open and there's not a lot of services available. A lot of them will come to our to our to our building, and it's a very unconventional sort of form of worship, because the first hour and a half we just sit at tables and we just interact and talk and chat with people, and we accept them as they are. They come in however they come in, offer them tea, coffee, maybe a muffin just like this, things like that. And then we'll move into some worship, and some will stay and some won't. And it's unconventional, but it is some of the most meaningful ministry that I think that the Lord could have called me to. I feel like I am a missionary because I do still miss being a foreign field missionary. But it's amazing how God knew what He had put in my heart, and that He found, I would say, the perfect placement, the perfect match for me to live out what He's placed in me, and just loving people and serving them, accepting them for who they are. And He's allowing me to be that kind of a missionary right here in my own backyard, right here in the prairies of Canada. And so, yeah, uh, our ministry, just a brief overview, is that the Youth for Christ ministry in Brandon's been around for about 75 years, and over the years, they've always had a heart for helping the homeless and the most needy, and now we've also moved into helping people with addictions. And that's who specifically I work with. But over those 75 years, they've accumulated and own probably 60 apartments around the city. So we're able to, with the help of welfare, partnering with welfare, partnering also with the court system, because a lot of our youth are coming to us sort of in halfway house kind of parole kind of situations, um, but all kinds of backgrounds. And so we're able to provide them housing, and at the same time, we're able to form a community of people where um, there's lots of difficulties because these are very raw, broken people, but we are able to try to form a community of love and of introducing them to faith, to the scriptures, to a loving God, to a Savior. who can guide them into the life that they're actually looking for. Some of them embrace that. Others, of course, you can imagine, they come to us very jaded and they don't want to hear anything about, especially about religion. They don't want to hear about that. But they do feel loved. They do feel cared for. And the team that we work with, I feel like that the Lord is doing an amazing work amongst us. And so I am so grateful for where He's placed me. And I look forward to seeing, lives continuing to be changed. And of course, we can share more stories about that in the future. But this morning, I want to remind us that each one of us, really spiritually speaking, we're like each one of my youth. Each one of us, as Romans chapter 3 tells us, that each one of us had fallen short of the glory of God. Each one of us had gone astray in our own way. Maybe we didn't end up in court, in drug court, and in trouble with the law, and in gangs, and everything that happens in the inner cities of our bigger cities in North America. But each one of us, in a sense, had moved into our own way of living, tried to live our own way, and probably, like the prodigal son, realized, what am I doing? This isn't working, right? I'm eating pig slop when I could be eating the banquets that my Father enjoys. And so the Lord calls us back to Him. That's why He sent His Son. That's why He sent Jesus Christ, the God with us. Because God, through Christ, we are able to see the design of the way life was meant to be lived in flesh. Even though we read the stories, we can still see that the way that Jesus lived, the love and compassion, the service to others, calling people into their identity as beloved children of the Father, of their Creator, and learning how to live in that way of life, that's what life is all about. That's the way life was meant to be lived. And that's how we can live. In fact, our job now, according to 1 John, the beloved disciple of Jesus who walked with Jesus, lived with Him, he says in his epistle at the end of the Bible, he says, whoever claims to live in Christ must walk as Jesus did. And so now that's our calling, right? Our calling is that we come to know the Father who loved us so much that He sent His only Son, right? So that we could learn how to live in this eternal way of living that comes from the Creator, right? And so now we have the opportunity to live and walk as Jesus did. And so we're called to live and be living examples, living sacrifices of Christ in a broken world. And the good thing is that God never asks us to do anything in His kingdom without first filling us with Him, so that we can go out into whatever task that He calls for us to do when we surrender to Him. And we can do it with His knowledge and with His power. So we're not trying to do it on our own. It makes me think of Jesus is teaching in John chapter 15 of the vine and the branches. And he says, apart from me, you can do nothing. Right? In the kingdom of God, if we think that we're going to do anything of eternal value in the world for God, but we're not doing it being guided by God and His knowledge and His power, we're probably going to just find ourselves getting burnt out, right? I'll be honest, in my beginning stages of doing ministry in Brazil, I was probably that young guy, thinking I'm going to go to Brazil and we're all, the 10 of us from the U.S., we're going to go to Brazil and we're going to take over the whole city by our own might and our technologies and our plans and strategies. And God says, no, that's not the way it works. The way it works is that you come to know me, you come to work in knowledge of me, knowing that you are loved by me, and then I will show you what it is that I want you to do. And I think God, when I look at the scripture, I think that's what He has done with every single person that He's ever called to partner with Him to do good works in the world. And so I think of all the prophets. I think of anyone that was ever called by God to do anything for God's glory in His kingdom. And I see that it's that same pattern, that God first comes and that person has an encounter with the living God. Right? So, an example. I could have picked anybody, but the one that came to my mind this week is Isaiah. Because I love in Isaiah chapter 6 the encounter that Isaiah had. Isaiah lived 700 years before Jesus, and he was called by God to do a very difficult task, to take the divided kingdom, the people who God had chosen as His chosen people to be a light to the nations. They were to exemplify the living God to the whole world. And the reality is that they were doing anything but that, right? The Israelite people were not living up to their calling to be an example, a light to the world, a light to the Gentiles. In fact, all they were doing was fighting amongst each other and worshiping anything but their Creator, right? And God said, I've had enough. And He calls prophet Isaiah, and He says, you're going to be my chosen instrument. And you're going to go to those people, and you're going to remind them who I am. And we can just imagine if we were Isaiah, and if God called us to go to wherever, and you're going to go, and you're going to call, you're going to go to downtown Brandon, and you're going to call all these wannabe gangsters to come to know me, right? Like, we might be a little intimidated by that. I'm sure Isaiah was too. I'm sure God knows that about us. And so He gives him an encounter. I want to read to us again, even if you've read this many times. Just try to put yourself, imagine you're Isaiah in this situation and having this encounter with the Creator of the universe. And it says in verse 1, I saw the Lord seated on a throne, high and exalted, and the train of His robe filled the temple. And above Him were seraphs, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying, and they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of His glory. And at the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. And I can imagine right about then, Isaiah was like freaking out. I don't know, we don't get many earthquakes around here, but Alicia and I have lived through a few earthquakes, and I'll tell you that just an earthquake itself would it'll scare you, let alone all of this that Isaiah was experiencing. And so what's his response? How does he respond to this obvious encounter with the Creator, God of the universe? Well, verse 5 tells us, "Woe to me," I cried. "I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty." So his response is, wow, I am nothing like you, God. You are the Almighty. You are the King. You are the glorious one. And I am not. And then it says that one of the seraphs flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar, and with it he touched my mouth and said, "See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for." And so there we see the love and the grace and the forgiveness and the reaching out and the extension of God's mercy to all of us. He knows that each one of us have fallen short of his glory. We don't live the way he desires for us to live many times. But he's also a loving, forgiving, merciful God who wants to reconcile and bring us back into relationship with him. And that's what he does here for Isaiah. And then he says, "I heard the voice of the Lord saying, 'Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?'" The "us" there being a very obvious reference to the Trinity, the three-head God. "And I said, 'Here I am, send me.' And he said, 'Go tell this people, be ever hearing but never understanding, be ever seeing but never perceiving, and make the heart of this people calloused, make their ears dull and close their eyes, otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed.'" And we know that Jesus repeats this many times in his ministry, speaking to the religious leaders 700 years later. So God understands. He sees the brokenness of the world. He sees how the world, many have turned away from him, and he calls people, servants of his, to go and to be sent out and to go for him, to be an example for him. But he doesn't ever do that without first letting us know that we're not going alone, and that going alone doesn't work anyways. Anything that we're doing, it needs to be led and empowered by the God of the universe, who calls us to join into his will to see a broken world come to be renewed. And that's what I think that he is in some way calling each of us to join with him in what he's trying to do. And I kind of feel lucky that in my job at Youth for Christ, I get to see how God first showed me how I can join with him and what he's wanting to do in the inner city of Brandon, where I am. But I get to see how he does that on a daily basis as he reveals himself to the young people that I'm working with. And many of them who never really experienced, if they had any sort of spiritual background, they've never really experienced the love of God in their lives. And he allows me to, and our team, to be able to allow them to get a glimpse of who he really is in their lives. And just one example, I'm working with a young lady right now. She came to us a couple months ago. She was 13 weeks pregnant, and she came to us from Winnipeg. She's battling addictions, but she's trying to become sober because she realized that she's addicted. She's pregnant and addicted. Luckily, she's aware of that and wanting to get help, and so she came to our program. And so I met with her. It was a Monday afternoon, and so I was like, hey, can we meet again tomorrow after doing the introductions and stuff? And she's like, well, actually, I need to tell you that tomorrow I'm going back to Winnipeg. And I was like, oh, okay. Can I ask you why you're going back to Winnipeg? And she's like, well, I'm 13 weeks pregnant, and I don't even love the guy at all that gave me this baby, and I have no way of bringing this child up. I'm struggling with this addiction, and I have an appointment tomorrow at the hospital. So it's obvious what she was doing. And so I just said to her, I said, have you talked to anybody about this? Or like, is this your is this your final decision? Like you're comfortable with that decision? And she said, well, to be honest with you, no one else knows that I'm even pregnant. And to be honest with you, I don't really want to get rid of the baby. I've always wanted to be a mom, but I just have no idea how I could ever provide a life for this child. And I was like, would you like to talk to somebody about this? Because I just happen to be good friends with the lady that runs the pregnancy center in downtown Brandon. And she was like, well, actually, yeah, I'd love to talk to somebody. And so I call up my friend Ruth, and she's like, absolutely, send her down. So we go there, and I sit in the waiting room while Ruth talks to her for about an hour. And she comes out of the room with Ruth and smile on her face, and I'm like, so how did that go? And she's like, well, we can meet again tomorrow because I'm not going to Winnipeg tomorrow. And I was just like, it's amazing. It's amazing how when people can have an encounter with loving people who can speak words of life and hope into people, something that this girl, now that I've gotten to know her, I can guarantee you that's not something that she was used to hearing. And how just one conversation could change her life. And now the amazing thing is she's 25 weeks pregnant, so she's got her big belly. And now that it's summer, she's not afraid to show her big belly. But anyways, on Friday, we moved her from one of our apartments we have a mom's floor. And so we were able to get her an apartment with the other moms in our program, because in about 15 weeks, she's going to have her first child. And I just think that's an amazing story. And not only that, but she comes to all of our programs that we offer that has anything to do with coming to know God she doesn't miss anything. She's coming to know the Lord through our Bible studies and our programs. And I just think it's amazing what God can do through people when we're open, when we're not judgmental, when we simply go into the world and we say, just like Isaiah, here I am, send me. And God gives us all kinds of opportunities to share him with broken people. And they get to have that encounter with the Lord as well. So this is Isaiah, but let's skip ahead 600 years and remember that Jesus, of course, as the Emmanuel, as the God with us, he came and he was the perfect example of examples of how we're meant to be light and salt and to bring hope to people in the world. And we can see how Jesus purposefully chose the less fortunate of society, even in the first century. He purposefully chose to spend time with the less fortunate, with the sinners, even with friends of sinners and prostitutes. It was one of the ways that he was described by people that didn't like him in a derogatory way. But it's because that's who God's heart has always been for. He's always been for the less fortunate. And I'm reminded that Jesus teaches before he goes to his death, one of the great teachings that speaks to all of us as we think of our lives and we think of the end of our lives, when each one of us will be going before our Creator and he'll ask us, hey, Travis, how was life? What did you do for me in that experience that I gave you on planet Earth? And this is what Jesus says to those that were listening and to us today. I'm going to be reading from Matthew 25, verse 37. He says, then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go and visit you? And the king will reply, I tell you the truth, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. And that is a profound mystery. But it is clear that God doesn't give up on anyone ever. Amen to that, including ourselves. And that what we do for those people that maybe be less fortunate, we're actually doing it for him. Because I think that there's something that Jesus and God knows, who sees the brokenness of the world. And the world is not the world that God had envisioned when he created this beautiful planet. And he sees all the injustice and inequality. But God takes a side. He does take a side. And Jesus is saying here, the side that I am with is the side of the people who are suffering. And Jesus knows a thing or two about suffering, right? He knows what it feels like to be abandoned or feel abandoned by his Father when he's suffering, literally dying, being murdered on a cross. And so he calls us to continue to carry out this same ministry with this same heart, because I think God has a special place in his heart for the least of these, the forgotten ones in our society. I think of the girl that I got a message from on Thursday morning. Once a month, we have what we call a prayer day. So it was my prayer day, my day. I got a break from the day-to-day work that I do with all the young adults, and my time was to pray. I just had no idea that that day I was going to have a very specific person to pray for, because I get a message, and it's one of my other youth that I'm working with, and she tells me, I need you to come over because she didn't say it exactly like this, but I unsuccessfully tried to kill myself last night. And so I was able to share with the team, hey, somebody needs to go and help. You don't know her, so I'll just say her name, Tiara. Uh, and somebody's going to need to be with her today and just minister to her and just love her and pray for her and just listen. And so then it was my turn to do that on Friday. And she opened up and shared with me the darkness that she feels that just takes a grip over her to the point that she feels useless, even though she's living with addictions, and she has 4 children with 2 men and doesn't get to see any of them. And of course that attributes to her where she's at, with her self-esteem, and just being able to share with her and remind her. And I shared with her from Psalm 139 that, Tara, you were fearfully and wonderfully made. You were knit together in your mother's womb. You're not just a person, as she said, taking up space on earth. That's a lie. That's a lie. A lie, and I did. I said, I know you might not want to hear this, because she's sort of anti-religion. She's had lots of experiences with religion that have not been positive. But I said, that's a lie from the darkest parts of the human experience. And that person, that power, that force wants to see you destroyed. And so we need to help you to come to see who your creator, because she still believes in a creator, that your creator is actually your father, the father that you never had because she was adopted out at 1 month old. He loves you. And I could just see in her as she's sharing her, just showing her emotion, that the Lord was giving her that encounter that only He can give people. And so when we open ourselves up to joining with the Lord, who's wanting to work to bring healing to a broken world and to broken people, that He will guide us into the messiness. It's not easy, but He will guide us to show us ways that we can allow people to experience and encounter His love, His goodness, His grace, His mercy. Especially to, as Jesus would say here, the least of these brothers of mine. Because Jesus will never give up on anyone. And so the question today for us might be, who is God calling you or I to reach out to show His love? Because as people that are following Christ, we should be known as people that go the extra mile to love and serve others. And the church isn't always known for that. And I think that's something that we should be known for. So let's allow God's love to change us, maybe to break our hearts, and remind us that there's broken people in the world. And let's become those individuals and churches that lavishly pour out the love of Christ to the least of these. Right here in our area, I know that there's going to be people here. There's broken people everywhere. And we have to ask God to give us opportunities to share Him with others. And then it's our job to be obedient. And when the Lord says, "Who will go for us?" as He says to Isaiah, we can be like Isaiah and say, "Here I am. Send me." And this is how the first century Christians changed the world, and I believe that that's what He wants to do through us again in the 21st century. And so may God bless you, church, as you continue to transition to the next person that He's going to bring to minister here. Yes? And as you continue to ask the Lord, how do you want me to serve right here in Gravelburg and in southwest Saskatchewan? And may God bless you on that journey so that we can do everything for His glory and His kingdom. Amen. God bless you.